The NATO summit in Washington is taking place on the third year of full-scale war in Ukraine, and there are some voices about potential peace talks with Russia between Kiev and Moscow. What is an American point of view on such eventual peace talks with Russia, if it's possible or not?
Well, look, we've always thought that the way this war ends is probably through some negotiation. But you can only do that if and when President Zelensky is willing to do that. And he has shown no interest in having to sit down and negotiate here. He still is fighting for territory, for the lives of the Ukrainian people. Look at what happened over the weekend now. Almost 50 people killed in strikes on civilian targets across the country. And Mr. Putin, come on, he has shown no interest in bringing this war to an end. And you can't blame President Zelensky for not being willing to even entertain the idea of negotiations at this point when his people are being killed and slaughtered the way that Mr. Putin is doing. So our focus right now is making sure that the Ukrainians can succeed on the battlefield. And they have made some progress here in recent weeks with the resurging now of U.S. and Western assistance. But also with an eye towards making sure that if and when President Zelensky is willing to entertain the idea of negotiations, that he's doing it from a position of strength. He's doing it on his terms. As the President Biden has said many times, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, and we're gonna be working with President Zelensky, and he gets to decide what negotiations look like.
The President of Ukraine actually said that it's possible to conduct such peace talks with Russia, but only through mediators. So how do you think which countries would be able to play such a role of mediators?
I don't think I could come up with a list right now. I think that would be something for President Zelensky to determine who he would find credible. What I can tell you is that, again, if and when he's ready, he will find no better friend, no stronger partner than the United States in that effort.
Talking about aid package for Ukraine with $61 billion, how would this help change the situation in the front line in Ukraine, taking into account that Russia mobilizes about 30,000 of troops each month to send to Ukraine?
We believe that the U.S. aid that has gone to Ukraine, now 7 packages from President Biden, has already made a difference on the battlefield. We've seen the Russians pull back from their efforts to get Kharkiv. They failed in Zaporizhia. They failed elsewhere in the east. The Ukrainian forces are now being resupplied, and we can see those weapons making a real difference on the battlefield. But look, make no mistake, those 6 months where there was no aid coming from the United States definitely made a difference in a negative sense, and made it much harder on Ukraine, and allowed Russia to make some small, but still some territorial gains here. What we want to make sure is that the aid and assistance keeps flowing, and it will. The Ukrainian people can count on that. There'll be additional security assistance packages coming, and that they'll continue to have our support when it comes to being able to push the Russians back. And one of the key capabilities that they need right now is air defense. And here at the NATO summit, you're going to see the allies really come together and talk about air defense capabilities for Ukraine and what they need for a longer period of time.
But how would you estimate in what position Ukraine now is? Does it lose or does it near to win?
I think I'd leave that to President Zelensky. It's his war he's fighting, and I don't think we want to get into characterizations here from Washington. I would just say that the United States is going to do everything we can to make sure that Ukraine wins this war, and that we are already seeing signs on the battlefield from the east all the way down to the south that the Ukrainians are regaining some of the territory that the Russians have tried to take in recent weeks and months, and that they're having some success. I don't want to sound too lighthearted about this. I mean, it's coming at a cost of the Ukrainian people too, as we've seen over the weekend. And they too are suffering battlefield losses and casualties, and that's something that we take very seriously. And there's obviously still a lot of fighting along that front. So it's a hard slog, to be sure, but we are seeing progress by the Ukrainians.
United States support Ukraine since the first day of full-scale war, and even before, actually. But are there any measures, if it comes about as long as it takes, talking about aid to Ukraine?
We are still in this to support Ukraine so that they can be successful. And as we've said, we'll do that for as long as we have to do that. Now, hopefully, you know, it won't be an exorbitant amount of time. I think we'd all like to see this war end as soon as possible, the Ukrainian people more than anybody. But it's important that it ends on terms that are in keeping with President Zelensky's vision of a just peace, that are in keeping with the rights and the responsibilities, the lives and the livelihoods of the Ukrainian people. It has to end on those terms. And as President Biden has said clearly, and said it again at the G7 meeting in Italy just a couple of weeks ago, the United States will stay at this task. We will not abandon Ukraine. As a matter of fact, as you know, he signed a bilateral security agreement with Ukraine. And at the NATO summit this week, there will be a gathering of all the nations that have signed bilateral security agreements with Ukraine, because that's important too. Whenever this war ends, however it ends, whatever things look like on the ground, one thing is undeniably true, that there's still going to be a long border between Ukraine and Russia, and the Ukrainian people must expect that their neighbor in Russia is still going to be potentially able for more aggressive action. They're still going to have a long border to defend, and we've got to make sure that over the long term, even post-conflict, that Ukraine has what it needs to defend itself.
Thank you so much for your time and for United States support.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
That's good.
Anyway, Mike. You do what you need.